The Saturday afternoon heat pressed down on the Iron King's clubhouse like a heavy blanket. Inside, the air conditioning hummed while 12 bikers sat around worn leather couches, laughing over cold beers and rehashing stories from last week's charity ride. Marcus "Tank" Williams wiped foam from his beard, his deep laugh echoing off the walls decorated with motorcycle memorabilia and faded photographs. The Iron Kings weren't your typical motorcycle club. Sure, they looked the part with their leather vests, tattooed arms, and bikes that roared like thunder, but they'd spent the last 15 years building something different in this neighborhood. They fixed up playgrounds, escorted domestic violence survivors to court, and made sure local kids had school supplies every September. The knock came so quietly that most of them didn't hear it at first. It was Tommy Wrench Rodriguez who noticed, pausing mid-sentence with his beer halfway to his lips. The knock came again, more insistent this time, small fists pounding against the heavy wooden door with desperate urgency. Tank exchanged glances with Snake, the club's vice president, before pushing himself up from the couch. His boots thudded across the concrete floor as he approached the door, instincts already telling him something wasn't right. Nobody just walked up to a biker clubhouse, especially not in the middle of the afternoon when the bikes were lined up outside like a warning. When Tank pulled open the door, his heart stopped. Standing on the concrete steps was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her pink shirt was torn at the shoulder, and tears carved clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks. Her knees were scraped and bleeding, like she'd been running hard and had fallen more than once. But it was her eyes that hit Tank like a punch to the gut. Those wide, terrified eyes held a kind of fear that no child should ever know. Her chest heaved as she struggled to catch her breath, her small hands trembling as they gripped the doorframe. "Please," she gasped, her voice cracking with desperation. "They're beating my mama. Please, you have to help her." The words tumbled out between sobs, each one more frantic than the last. "They won't stop. She told me to run and find help, and I saw your motorcycles, and I thought maybe you could." Her voice broke completely, dissolving into tears that shook her tiny frame. Behind Tank, the entire clubhouse had gone silent. 12 hardened men who'd seen their share of trouble stood frozen, every beer forgotten, every conversation abandoned. This wasn't just some domestic dispute call they could pass off to the police. This was a child begging them for help, and everything about her terror said there wasn't time to wait for sirens and badges. Tank dropped to one knee, bringing himself eye level with the little girl. His massive hands, scarred from years of mechanical work and the occasional bar fight, looked enormous next to her small shoulders. "What's your name, sweetheart?" His voice came out gentler than anyone had heard in years. "Maya," she whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Maya Thompson. We live 3 blocks over on Maple Street. The big white house with the broken fence. Please, mister, they're gonna kill her." She grabbed Tank's vest with both hands, her fingers digging into the leather. "My mama's boyfriend brought his friends, and they're all drunk," and she tried to make them leave, but they pushed her down and started hitting her, and there was so much blood. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Tank looked back at his brothers, and without a single word being spoken, every man in that clubhouse understood exactly what was about to happen. Snake was already pulling out his phone, hitting speed dial for their lawyer who kept the police department on standby for situations exactly like this. Wrench grabbed the first aid kit from the wall, knowing they'd likely need it. Big Mike cracked his knuckles, his jaw set in a hard line that spoke of barely controlled rage. These men had daughters, sisters, mothers. They'd all known women who'd suffered at the hands of violent men. And they'd all made a promise years ago that they'd never stand by and let it happen if they could stop it. "How many men, Maya?" Tank asked, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. The little girl held up 4 fingers, her hand shaking. "4 of them. Big ones. And they locked the doors." Tank nodded once, then stood up, scooping Maya into his arms like she weighed nothing. He turned to face his club, and the look in his eyes needed no translation. "Iron Kings," he said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of iron itself. "We ride. Now." The response was immediate. Men moved with practiced precision, grabbing keys, checking phones, pulling on gloves. This wasn't about territory or reputation or proving anything to anyone. This was about a terrified little girl who'd run through her neighborhood bleeding and desperate, who'd knocked on their door because she had nowhere else to turn. And the Iron Kings had never, not once in 15 years, turned away someone who needed help. The sound of 12 motorcycles roaring to life shattered the quiet afternoon like a thunderclap. Maya sat in front of Tank on his custom Harley, his arm wrapped protectively around her middle, holding her secure against his chest. He'd grabbed a spare helmet from inside, one they kept for kids during community events, and strapped it carefully onto her head. "Hold on tight, Maya," he told her, feeling her small hands grip his forearm with surprising strength. "We're going to get your mema. I promise you that." She nodded against him, and he felt her tears soaking through his shirt. Behind them, the rest of the Iron Kings formed up in a tight formation that spoke of years riding together. Snake took point beside Tank, his silver beard whipping in the wind as they pulled out of the parking lot. Wrench and Big Mike flanked them on either side, while the others spread out in a protective V formation that made the entire group look like something out of an action movie. They weren't speeding recklessly, Tank kept it controlled because he had precious cargo, but there was an urgency to their movement that made cars pull over and pedestrians stop to stare. The deep rumble of their engines announced them blocks away, a rolling thunder that echoed off buildings and rattled windows. People who knew the Iron Kings stepped out onto their porches, sensing something serious was happening. This wasn't a casual ride or a show of force. This was a response. Left at the light, Maya called out, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. Tank nodded, signaling the turn to the others. They moved as one unit, 12 bikes taking the corner in perfect synchronization. The neighborhood changed as they rode deeper into the residential area. The houses here were older, some well-maintained, others showing signs of neglect. Chain-link fences enclosed small yards where children's toys lay scattered in the grass. An old man watering his lawn stopped mid-spray, watching the procession pass with wide eyes. Tank saw him reach for his phone, probably calling the police, and that was fine. Let them come. The more witnesses to what they found, the better. There. Maya's shout cut through Tank's thoughts. She pointed ahead to a two-story white house with peeling paint and, just as she'd said, a broken fence leaning drunkenly in the front yard. A battered pickup truck and two sedans were parked haphazardly in the driveway, one of them half on the lawn. Even from the street, Tank could hear raised voices and the sound of something crashing inside the house. His jaw tightened. They weren't too late, but they were cutting it close. He felt Maya tense in his arms, her breathing becoming rapid and panicked. "It's okay, baby girl," he murmured. "You did good. You brought us here, and now we're going to handle this. But I need you to stay on the bike, understand? No matter what you see or hear, you stay right here with Wrench. Can you do that for me?" Maya turned her head to look up at him, her eyes still wet with tears but showing the first glimpse of hope. "You're really going to save her?" Tank met her gaze with absolute certainty. "I guarantee it." He pulled the bike to a stop at the curb, the others forming a semicircle around him. The engines cut off one by one, and suddenly the afternoon was filled with a different kind of sound. Shouting from inside the house, a woman's voice screaming for them to stop, male laughter that made Tank's blood boil. He lifted Maya off the bike and handed her to Wrench, who'd already dismounted. "Keep her safe," Tank said, and Wrench nodded, settling Maya on his bike and crouching beside her to block her view of the house. The remaining 11 bikers stood in a line at the edge of the property, and for a moment, they just looked at the house, assessing the situation with the kind of cold calculation that came from years of dealing with trouble. Snake was already back on his phone with their lawyer. "Yeah, we're on scene. Domestic violence in progress, child reported multiple assailants. We're going in to secure the victim. Get the police here now, but tell them we're not waiting." He ended the call and looked at Tank. "Legal says we're covered under Good Samaritan if we witness a crime in progress. They're expediting patrol cars, ETA 5 minutes. Tank nodded. 5 minutes was a long time when someone was getting beaten. It was too long. "Big Mike, Chains, take the back door in case anyone tries to run," Tank ordered, falling into the leadership role that came naturally to him. "Snake, you're with me on the front. Rest of you, secure the perimeter. Nobody leaves this property except in a police car or an ambulance. And boys," he paused, making eye contact with each man, "we do this clean. We're here to protect, not to get arrested. We defend that woman, we restrain these men, but we don't cross any lines that'll put us in cells. Clear?" A chorus of acknowledgement came back to him. These weren't hot-headed kids looking for a fight. They were grown men who understood exactly what was at stake and how to handle it without making things worse. They moved toward the house with purpose, boots crunching on the gravel driveway. As they got closer, the sounds from inside became clearer and more disturbing. Glass breaking. Heavy footfalls. A woman's voice, strained and desperate, begging them to leave her alone. Then a sound that made every man freeze for a split second, the unmistakable crack of a hand hitting flesh, followed by a body hitting the floor. That was it. Tank didn't wait another second. He hit the front door with his shoulder, the lock giving way under 260 pounds of motivated muscle. The door slammed open, revealing a scene that would fuel his nightmares for weeks to come. The living room looked like a tornado had torn through it. Furniture lay overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor, and in the center of the chaos, a woman curled on the ground trying to protect her head with her arms. 4 men stood around her in various states of drunken rage, their shirts untucked, faces flushed red from alcohol and violence. Beer cans and liquor bottles littered every surface, explaining the smell that hit Tank like a wall, stale alcohol, sweat, and the metallic tang of blood. The man closest to the woman, a heavy-set guy with a shaved head and a stained tank top, had his fist raised for another blow. He froze mid-swing when the door crashed open, turning to see Tank's massive silhouette filling the doorway. "What the hell?" the man slurred, his eyes struggling to focus. "Who the?" His words died in his throat as Snake appeared beside Tank, then another biker, then another. In seconds, the doorway and windows framed 11 of the most intimidating men these drunk idiots had ever seen. The woman on the floor, Maya's mother, looked up through a swollen eye, her split lip bleeding freely down her chin. Her shirt was torn, revealing bruises already forming on her ribs and shoulders. When she saw the bikers, confusion crossed her battered face, probably wondering if her situation had just gone from bad to worse. Tank raised his hands in a calming gesture directed at her, trying to communicate without words that they were there to help. "Police are on the way," Tank announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You 4 need to step away from that woman right now and put your hands where we can see them." The shaved-head man, apparently the boyfriend Maya had mentioned, let out a harsh laugh and gestured wildly at his friends. "You think you scare us? This is my house, and this is my woman. You're trespassing, and I'll have you arrested." He was drunk enough to be stupid, dangerous combination. Tank didn't move from his position, but his eyes never left the man's raised fist. "This stops now. You've got about 30 seconds before those sirens get loud enough for you to hear. You can go peacefully, or we can make sure you stay put until the police arrive. Your choice." One of the other men, younger with a scraggly beard and wild eyes, reached behind his back. "I got something for you bikers," he started to say, but he never finished the sentence. Big Mike moved with surprising speed for such a large man, crossing the room in 3 strides and grabbing the kid's wrist before whatever he was reaching for could clear his waistband. The motion was smooth, practiced, and completely controlled. Mike twisted the arm up and back, forcing the young man to his knees with a yelp of pain. "Don't," Mike said simply, his other hand retrieving a small knife from the kid's belt. He tossed it across the room where it clattered against the wall, far from anyone's reach. "Don't make this worse for yourself." That's when things exploded into chaos. The boyfriend lunged at Tank with a roar, throwing a wild haymaker that Tank saw coming from a mile away. He sidestepped easily, using the man's momentum against him to guide him past and into the waiting arms of Snake, who wrapped him up in a restraint hold that was more wrestling than fighting. The man struggled and cursed, but Snake had 40 years of experience and about 50 pounds on him. "Settle down," Snake growled in his ear. "You're done hurting women today." The other 2 men tried to make a break for the back door, only to run straight into Chains and another biker who'd positioned themselves there. It was over in less than a minute, all 4 men restrained and sitting against the wall, breathing hard and finally starting to realize the magnitude of their mistake. Tank immediately turned his attention to Maya's mother, dropping to his knees beside her with a gentleness that contradicted his size. My name is Marcus. I'm here to help you. Your daughter Maya is outside, she's safe. She came to our clubhouse and asked us to help you." The woman's good eye widened, tears spilling over. "Maya? Oh God, Maya. She got out." Her voice was rough, probably from screaming. Tank nodded, carefully helping her sit up. "She's a brave little girl. Probably saved your life. Can you tell me your name?" The woman winced as she moved, clutching her ribs. "Sarah. Sarah Thompson. I tried to get them to leave, I told Derek it was over, but he wouldn't go, and then his friends." She broke down, the trauma of the last hour overwhelming her now that safety had finally arrived. Wrench appeared with the first aid kit, kneeling on Sarah's other side. He pulled out gauze and antiseptic, his hand steady as he began carefully cleaning the cut on her lip. "We're going to take care of you, Sarah," he said softly. "The ambulance is coming. Do you have any injuries that need immediate attention? Trouble breathing, severe pain anywhere?" Sarah shook her head, then winced at the movement. "Just my ribs and my face. They pushed me down the stairs earlier." Tank's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He looked over at Derek, the boyfriend, who was still struggling against Snake's hold and spewing curses and threats. The man had no idea how lucky he was that these bikers were who they were, because the old tank, the one from 20 years ago, might not have been so controlled. The sound of sirens finally broke through the tension, growing louder by the second. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows as multiple police cars pulled up outside. Tank stood, positioning himself between Sarah and the four restrained men, a human shield in leather and denim. Officers poured through the door, hands on their weapons until they assessed the scene. The lead officer, a sergeant named Rodriguez who knew the Iron Kings from their community work, took in the situation quickly. "Tank, what have we got?" Tank gestured to Sarah. "Domestic violence, multiple assailants. The victim's 7-year-old daughter came to our clubhouse for help. We arrived to find these 4 men beating her. We restrained them and waited for you. The little girl is outside with one of my guys, and she needs to be checked by paramedics too." Rodriguez nodded, immediately calling for the ambulance to attend to both Sarah and Maya. Other officers moved to take custody of the 4 men, reading them their rights as they cuffed them properly. Derek was still running his mouth, threatening lawsuits and claiming the bikers had assaulted him. Rodriguez shut him down with a look. "Save it for your lawyer. We've got a house full of witnesses who'll testify these men came in and secured you after assaulting a victim." As the police processed the scene and paramedics arrived to treat Sarah, Tank stepped outside to check on Maya. The little girl was still with Wrench, but the moment she saw Tank, she jumped off the bike and ran to him. "My mama." Tank caught her and lifted her up. "Your mama's going to be okay. She's hurt, but she's going to be fine. You want to see her?" Maya nodded frantically, and Tank carried her inside, careful to shield her view of the arrested men being led out in handcuffs. The hospital waiting room buzzed with an unusual energy. 11 bikers sat in chairs meant for average-sized people, looking like giants in a dollhouse, their leather vests and tattoos drawing stares from other visitors. Tank stood by the window, watching the parking lot while Snake handled the endless questions from police detectives, social workers, and hospital administrators. Maya sat between Wrench and Big Mike, coloring in a book someone had grabbed from the gift shop, her small legs swinging as she concentrated on staying inside the lines. Every few minutes, she'd look up at Tank, as if making sure he was still there, and he'd give her a reassuring nod. The trust in her eyes both humbled and terrified him. In the span of a few hours, this little girl had placed her entire world in their hands. A doctor emerged from the emergency room, pulling off latex gloves as he approached. Tank met him halfway, and the others stood, forming a semicircle of concern. "Sarah Thompson is stable," the doctor began, and Tank felt the tension drain from his shoulders. "She has 3 cracked ribs, significant bruising, and lacerations that required stitches. She's also showing signs of previous abuse, older injuries that healed improperly. We've documented everything for the police report. Physically, she'll recover, though she'll be in considerable pain for the next few weeks. Emotionally..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "She's going to need support and counseling. Both she and her daughter will." Tank thanked him, then asked the question that had been weighing on him. "Can Maya see her mother?" The doctor smiled. "Sarah's been asking for her every 5 minutes. Room 204, down the hall. But maybe just a few of you? We don't want to overwhelm her." Tank picked up Maya, who'd already abandoned her coloring book and was reaching for him. "You ready to see your mama, sweetheart?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around his neck. Snake and Wrench followed them down the hallway, their boots squeaking on the polished linoleum floor. When they reached room 204, Tank knocked gently before pushing the door open. Sarah lay propped up in the hospital bed, her face cleaned up but showing the full extent of the damage, a black eye, stitches on her cheekbone, her split lip swollen to twice its normal size. But when she saw Maya, her face transformed. "Baby," she called out, her voice breaking. Tank set Maya down, and the little girl ran to the bed, careful even in her excitement not to hurt her mother. Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms as best she could, both of them crying and holding each other. Tank and his brothers hung back, giving them space for their reunion. After a few minutes, Sarah looked up, her eyes finding Tank. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Maya told me what happened, how she ran to your clubhouse, how you came so fast. If you hadn't..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Tank stepped closer, his expression serious. "You don't need to thank us, Sarah. We did what any decent person should do. But I need to ask you something important. Do you have somewhere safe to go when they discharge you? Family, friends, anywhere Derek doesn't know about?" Sarah's face fell, and she shook her head slowly. My family's back in Ohio. I haven't talked to them in 3 years because Derek didn't want me to. My friends, he drove them all away. I've got nowhere. I was saving money to leave, hiding it at work, but I wasn't ready yet. The 3 bikers exchanged glances, and Snake nodded slightly. Tank pulled up a chair and sat down, his elbows on his knees, speaking directly to Sarah. Here's what's going to happen. The Iron Kings have connections with a women's shelter about 40 minutes from here. It's a good place, safe, with counselors and legal advocates who help women in your exact situation. We've worked with them for years on fundraisers and security. Snake's already made some calls. They have a room for you and Maya, and they can keep you there as long as you need while you get back on your feet. Derek and his buddies are going to jail. The DA we talked to is filing serious charges, assault, child endangerment, the works. They won't make bail for a while, and when this goes to court, you'll have protection. Sarah listened, tears rolling down her cheeks, but these were different tears, tears of relief mixed with disbelief. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't even know us. Big Mike stepped forward, his gruff voice gentler than Tank had ever heard it. My sister died at the hands of her boyfriend when I was 22. Beat her to death while their kids slept in the next room. I wasn't there. Nobody was there. I've lived with that for 25 years, Sarah. So when a little girl knocks on our door saying her mama needs help, we don't think twice. We go. And we make sure no one ever has to live with what I live with. The room went quiet except for the beeping of monitors. Maya looked up at Big Mike with wide eyes, then at her mother. Mama, these are good people. I knew it when I saw them. Sarah pulled her daughter close again, looking at each biker in turn. I'll go to the shelter. And I'll testify against Derek. I'm done being afraid. The social worker arrived shortly after, a competent woman in her 40s who'd worked with the Iron Kings before. She confirmed the shelter arrangements and began discussing next steps with Sarah. Tank and the others stepped into the hallway to give them privacy. As they stood there, hospital staff walking past with curious glances, Snake clapped Tank on the shoulder. You know this isn't over, right? Derek's going to make bail eventually. He's going to be angry. And when angry men get out of jail, they go looking for revenge. Tank nodded grimly. He'd already thought about that. Then we make sure he knows there are consequences for coming near Sarah or Maya again. Legal consequences, and if necessary, the kind of consequences that come from 12 bikers making it very clear what will happen if he tries anything. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The Iron Kings protected their community, and as of today, Sarah and Maya Thompson were part of that community. Over the next few days, the Iron Kings orchestrated Sarah and Maya's move to the shelter with military precision. They packed up the safe belongings from the house, careful to avoid anything contaminated by Derek's presence. They set up a trust fund for Maya's education, seeded with donations from club members and local businesses who'd heard about what happened. Tank visited the shelter twice, just to check in, and each time Maya ran to him like he was family. Sarah was starting to smile again, carefully because of the stitches, but genuine smiles nonetheless. She was attending counseling sessions, meeting with lawyers about restraining orders, and slowly beginning to believe that she might actually have a future that didn't involve fear. The night before Derek's bail hearing, Tank gathered the club at their usual spot. They had plans to make and a message to send. Because some promises, the important ones, you keep forever. The courtroom was packed the day of Derek Mitchell's arraignment. Sarah sat in the front row, flanked by her victim's advocate and, to the surprise of many, Tank Williams. Behind them, the entire Iron Kings motorcycle club filled 3 rows, their presence both protective and intimidating. Derek, looking significantly less confident in his orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, scowled when he saw them. His public defender whispered urgently in his ear, probably telling him to control his expression, but the damage was done. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judith Brennan, noted the gallery with interest. She'd been on the bench long enough to know that when a motorcycle club showed up to support a victim, the defendant had made serious enemies. That wasn't good for Derek's prospects. The prosecutor laid out the charges with methodical precision. Aggravated assault, domestic violence, child endangerment, unlawful restraint, and because they'd found drugs during the arrest, possession with intent to distribute. Derek's 3 friends faced similar charges, though slightly lesser since Derek had thrown the most punches. The prosecutor played the 911 call that Snake had made, then showed photos of Sarah's injuries that made several people in the courtroom gasp. When she introduced the police officer's bodycam footage showing the scene the bikers had secured, the judge's expression hardened. Derek's lawyer tried to argue that his client had been restrained unlawfully by vigilantes, but Judge Brennan shut that down immediately. Counselor, citizens are allowed to intervene in crimes in progress, especially when a child has requested help for a parent being assaulted. Motion denied. The bail hearing didn't go the way Derek expected. His lawyer requested a reasonable bail given his clean record up to that point, but the prosecutor presented evidence of previous domestic violence calls to the same address that had resulted in no arrests because Sarah had been too afraid to press charges. There were hospital records showing Sarah's previous injuries, each documented with suspicious explanations. Judge Brennan listened to everything, then leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Derek. Mr. Mitchell, the evidence suggests you are a danger to Ms. Thompson and her daughter. You've shown a pattern of escalating violence, and the severity of this assault indicates you have no respect for the law or human life. Bail is set at $500,000, cash only. Furthermore, if you do make bail, you are forbidden from any contact with the victims, direct or indirect. You are to stay at least 1,000 feet away from Ms. Thompson, her daughter, their residence, and their places of work and school. Derek's face went purple with rage, and he started to shout, but the bailiff stepped forward, and his lawyer grabbed his arm, forcing him back into his seat. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Sarah and the bikers. Tank stepped in front of Sarah protectively, but she touched his arm. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I want to say something." She stepped up to the microphones, Maya holding her hand tightly. 3 weeks ago, I was in an abusive relationship that I thought I'd never escape. I was terrified every day, and I couldn't see any way out. Then my daughter did the bravest thing I've ever seen. She ran for help, and she found it in the most unexpected place. The Iron Kings Motorcycle Club saved my life. They didn't know me, they didn't owe me anything, but they came anyway. They protected me and my daughter, and they've continued to support us every day since. I want other women out there who are living in fear to know something. Help exists. People care. And sometimes, heroes wear leather vests and ride motorcycles. The story went viral within hours. News outlets across the country picked it up, and social media exploded with support for the Iron Kings. Donations poured into the women's shelter, so many that they had to set up a special fund. The Iron Kings charity work got national attention, and chapters from other cities reached out, wanting to establish similar community programs. But the real change happened locally. Women who'd been suffering in silence started reaching out for help, inspired by Sarah's courage. The police department saw a 30% increase in domestic violence reports in the following month, which the chief called a good thing because it meant victims felt safer coming forward. And through it all, Tank and his brothers continued their regular work, fixing bikes, organizing charity rides, and keeping an eye on their neighborhood. Sarah and Maya stayed at the shelter for 2 months before moving into a small apartment the Iron Kings helped them secure. The club members pooled resources to furnish it, and local businesses donated everything from kitchen supplies to Maya's bedroom set. Sarah found work at a law firm as a paralegal, her degree from years ago finally being put to use now that Derek wasn't sabotaging her job applications. Maya thrived in her new school, her teachers noting how much more confident and outgoing she'd become. But every Saturday, without fail, Sarah and Maya visited the Iron Kings Clubhouse. It had become a tradition. Maya would help wrench organize tools in the garage while Sarah cooked in the clubhouse kitchen, insisting on contributing something to the people who'd saved her life. On one particular Saturday, 6 months after that fateful knock on the door, the clubhouse hosted a barbecue. Kids from the neighborhood played in the parking lot while parents relaxed under pop-up tents, enjoying burgers and cold drinks. Maya ran around with other children, her laughter carrying on the summer breeze, a sound that made Tank smile every time he heard it. Sarah stood beside him, watching her daughter play, her own smile easy and genuine now that the bruises had long since faded. "She's thinking about joining the junior motorcycle program you guys run," Sarah said, bumping Tank's shoulder with her own. "Says she wants to learn to ride when she's old enough." Tank chuckled. "She's got the spirit for it. Girls got more courage than half the grown men I know." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again, her voice serious. "The trial's next month. I'm ready, but I'd feel better if..." She trailed off, but Tank understood. "We'll be there. All of us. Every day if you need us." Sarah nodded, blinking back tears that were becoming rare these days. "I still can't believe sometimes that this is my life now. That we're safe. That Maya can just be a kid without being afraid all the time. You gave us that, Tank. You and your brothers." Tank shook his head. "Maya gave it to you. She's the one who was brave enough to ask for help. We just did what anybody should have done. Sarah turned to face him fully. But most people wouldn't have. That's what makes you special. That's what makes the Iron Kings different. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tank watched his club members interact with the community they'd sworn to protect. Big Mike was teaching kids how to check tire pressure, his gruff demeanor melting as he patiently answered endless questions. Snake was showing off his bike to a group of admirers, telling stories that were probably only half true. Wrench had Maya on his shoulders, giving her a ride around the parking lot while she giggled and pretended to steer. This was what it was all about, not the leather vests or the roaring engines or the tough guy image. It was about being there when someone needed help. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was about making sure that when a scared little girl knocked on their door, she found exactly what she was looking for: heroes. The trial came and went, resulting in convictions for Derek and his friends. Derek received 8 years, the others slightly less. Sarah testified with strength that impressed everyone in the courtroom, and when the verdict was read, she didn't celebrate, she just exhaled, finally releasing years of held breath. Outside, the Iron Kings waited, and Maya ran to Tank, throwing her arms around his waist. "We won," she said, looking up at him with those same eyes that had been filled with terror 6 months ago but now sparkled with hope and joy. Tank ruffled her hair. "Yeah, sweetheart. You won." And as they all walked to their bikes, ready to escort Sarah and Maya home to their safe apartment, Tank realized something. That knock on the clubhouse door hadn't just changed Sarah and Maya's lives. It had reminded every single one of his brothers why they'd started this club in the first place. Some things were worth fighting for. Some promises were worth keeping. And sometimes, the most important thing you could do was simply answer the door when someone knocked and asked for help.